Hello, my name's Sean Brown from WiSen Innovation, and in this WiSen Quick Guide video series, I'm going to show you how you can set up a railway monitoring project within the web platform. So going into a WiSen project, we can see here that this is currently an active project where we have a camera installed, a gateway, and as you can see here, tilt meters. And what we've done previously on this job is that we've given the nodes a reference ID through going setup node ref ID and naming those nodes accordingly to the chainage or a reference name suitable for the project. The next stage, obviously, you would have data collected over a baseline or commissioning period, and you would be looking to offset those absolute values. So in essence, they start from a relative reference value, and that is normally 0. Now I've done that previously on this job, but for the purpose of this video, we are going to treat this as if we're also undertaking that process. Now there are two ways to do that, and I have separate videos which cover the node offset capability. And just to kind of summarize where this is, you would go into node offset, and here you can select all your nodes as we see here with the serial numbers or the reference ID, select the attribute, and then you can take them forward to a graphical display where you are looking to set the 0 reference. Now this is one method of undertaking that process. There is also a shortcut method within the railway model which I'm going to show you today. Now the node offset is a lot more powerful because obviously you're seeing the data graphically. You can set a median or an average, whereas within the railway model it is a very specific point, so that is not an average or a median value. So if your baseline, your commission period is short, then in essence it's kind of irrelevant in terms of setting an average or a median, but you want to kind of make sure you haven't got an outlier, that you're not at the peak or the trough. Now my way of probably undertaking this, if I was doing the railway model, which I will do, then if my nodes had been switched on for a period of time and I've been collecting data, as you see here on my screen, this is a current value, then essentially I would sense check the data, and you can see by clicking on the point we automatically display 24 hours of data. Now if I know, for instance, I have the luxury of 7 days of commissioning or baseline data, and you can see here I'm looking at that data over that week's period. And what we would not want to do, if this was a particularly high value, for instance, would be to accidentally pick the time for a peak or a trough when you are within the railway model. So where my mouse is here, you could be unfortunate enough by selecting a time where this gets defined as the 0 reference, and then obviously all data would be referencing this point, and so when you're at a trough you would have a larger than normal value. So this is cyclic movement, which generally just happens on all assets. So my way of doing this would be to sense check it. Look at a particular epoch where you think this was a middle point and make a note of that epoch or the time. As I'm doing just now. Okay, the next process for the railway model then is to go set up railway model. And you can see here I've got a couple of previous lines set up, but if you're new, then this would be a blank screen without any ticks. And the next process would be to add a railway line. You give this a suitable line name, and I'm going to just call this up main. And that would appear at the bottom, as we can see here, you're posed a series of questions. Now on the nodes themselves, they've got little direction arrows. So if you comply with that installation procedure, if I just scroll up to the one above, then essentially it will default to the sticker convention on the node. If you've gone against the grain, I suppose, then you have the choice to obviously define what you've installed, but you have to be consistent with the nodes as they're installed. You cannot mix and match the orientations. So going down, then I know that the y-axis is transversal, so it's across the sleeper, and longitudinally is the x. So the key question here is essentially, are you pointing that to a high chainage direction or not? So essentially on top of the node itself, you'll see there's an X arrow and there'll be a positive, or perhaps it's an X negative. But what the question is here is asking you, in which direction have you got the node pointing to the high chainage direction? So you obviously have X positive, X negative, or if you've got a different orientation, you can see here the other options. But I'm going to use the X positive. Leave the default on the next question and the spacing interval. So if you have purposely measured the spacing between your nodes installed on the sleepers, you have the opportunity here, or you have the opportunity in this process to put in the individual spacing. The nominal spacing for a network rail job is 3 meters, but in the real world, sleepers don't fall exactly 3 meters, and so you have the option here to put in those values that you've determined through a tape measure distance or a track trolley and so forth. So I'm going to leave this as 3. You may have a network chainage that you'd like to start at, but for this purpose I'm going to leave it at 0, and we will not be offsetting the points associated to the long section. We press add node. We're obviously going to have one type on this project. You'll see them displayed in rows. If we press this button, we can have them displayed in a column. And as I've previously used the reference ID, or I've inputted the name first, they've conveniently come through in order. And depending on how you tick them, this will be the order that they are placed in the subsequent rows. So obviously if I was to press the 18, that would be the next one in the process after 12. That's not what I want. Therefore, I would press 15, 18, 21, 24, and 28. The other option, obviously, is just to invert the selection. We confirm. We can see here they've come through in a relevant order. You have the option in the drop down to change that if you've made a mistake, or hold the left mouse button down and you can drag and drop these rows in the relevant order. But as long as you complied with the process initially, you won't have to do that step. You can see here there is no spacing, so it's because I've not pressed apply to all. So I'm happy to use 3. I'd apply it to all. Now, for instance, if I wanted 2.825 meters, then this is the option here to type that in. Press tab and you can see that all the mathematical chainage distance is auto calculated. So I'm just going to put that back to 3. Press tab. We ignore the long section offset. We're not offsetting the height from a 0 point, so we're going to use the 0 as the reference. And the other aspect to understand here, because at the top, if you're new, if you don't have existing railway lines, you will not have any of these ticked. So what do you want to have output from this project? Now, it's typical on jobs and for network rail that the relative change is the important values that they wish to review. If you have undertaking a track trolley survey or a rail shoe survey, you would have absolute values. So if you know the absolute values, what you can do here by obviously ticking the cant absolute and the twist absolute, you see you have a column here where if you know that the track currently has -5 cant deficiency, you would enter in -5, bearing in mind with your back to low mileage that when the track is leaning to the left, tilting to the left, that is a negative value. So you would enter in that associated value as you see here. Now I'm not interested in absolute in this example, so I'm going to untick it. And you can see all I'm interested in as my output is a cant relative, the twist. I may require the twist ratio relative, which is understood within the network rail world. And you can also have a long section where it's fixed on both ends. I will not go into the long section weighted. That's another mathematical formula more associated to the railways in France. Moving down, you can see here this is the data age that the computation is going to undertake. So for instance, if a node was offline for longer than 4 hours, therefore there was no data, you would not have a result. Now that's a problem potentially on a long section. So you would have no long sections because one of your nodes is offline. Now the way around that, obviously, because you can't always rectify a node or solve the problem, is if you see in this drop down box, you increase the data age. So that's how far it looks back to use data in any computations. I'm going to set that as max for this example. And I've finished the setup of that railway line. So I'm just going to press save because I'm happy with everything I've done. Press confirm. Now, in essence, I have finished this process, but if you have not nulled nodes, and as I mentioned earlier, that's a separate process, then here is essentially the shortcut process that I've mentioned, and that is auto-calculate. So save config, if you've previously done the node offset through the setup node offset, that would be the steps finished at this stage. Whereas if you have not done that and you'd like the shortcut method, then if you press auto calculate, you have here 3 options. So again, if you were looking to do temperature correction and you press this, you are taken forward to do the temperature correction of your data. Now that needs a sensible period of time, so we're not going to look into that now. We have the offset to 0, including temperature correlation. So again, if you've done the temperature correlation, then you would go to this offset to 0. Whereas in this example now, I'm not going to be doing temperature correlation, therefore the only process I want to do is offset to 0. I press this button. You can see here I may have multiple lines, and the line I've created just now is up main, and I press submit. Now note here I said that it's a specific point in the past that you are going to be setting as the reference value, the 0, and you would not potentially want the peak or the trough or an outlier value. So you note earlier in this video, I made a note of a data point I would like to use in the past, and that happened to be on the 22nd at 9 o'clock approximately. So I press this button, I press OK. So in other words, that value or a value very close at 9 o'clock, for instance, it may read at 9:30, that may be maybe the next epoch value, that would be the 0 reference point, and that would be the same for all your nodes. So this is where it's a shortcut, I suppose, and as opposed to going through the node offset, which is a much more powerful tool, and I'd recommend that on most jobs because of that capability. Whereas if you've got jobs that kind of have higher trigger values or very short commissioning or baseline, then this probably is the easier process for speed, especially if you're on night shifts. We press confirm, and you can see that's essentially the process. You'll have a little system calculating button that will take different amounts of time depending on how much data you've got. So come back to me in a minute when this is finished. Okay, there we go. That's complete. I'm just going to go and review the formulas. So essentially by pressing save config and the auto calculate, what that does is generates all the various different formulas that work out the cant and the twist and so forth. If you want to see those formulas, then in this button here, this takes you forward, and obviously this is quite a large table because I've got 4 railway lines, and the line that I've created, or the 3 deliverables, as you can see here: relative cant, relative twist, and the long section. So they are the 3 that I am interested in. And you have a little flashing button here. So if it's flashing here, it's essentially because you've changed something in the past, one of these formulas. So the next step would obviously be to press this button. Keep this as the default. I won't go into too much detail what this is. This is if you've replaced a node in the same location as a previous node, and essentially you want to carry forward the data into the new node. But it is used very rarely, as a situation doesn't happen very often. We press confirm, confirm again, and what that's doing is, because this project's got a lot of back computations that need to be done. So I'll end the video here. That shows you how to set up the railway line, how to null it very quickly on a specific point, and you should be good to go. Thank you.